You are listening to the serialized audiobook podcast for Blood of the Stars, an epic fantasy novel written by Karyne Norton, read by Paeter Frandsen and Karyne Norton. If you can't wait to listen to the whole audiobook, or if you want a signed physical copy, go to karynnorton.com/shop to get the lowest cost by buying direct. You can also find the audiobook on Audible, Barnes & Noble, and other standard retailers. Please enjoy the next installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. Chapter 29. Taking the ferry down to Valorian brought on a new form of torture for Eliana. Silmar had her alternate running through the properties of the Wheel of Magic and attempting to push energy to those around her, all while keeping her hair and face hidden under her hood. By the time they reached the Valorian docks, she was nearly falling asleep on her feet. In the distance, the Sun Gazer and city proper lit up with torchlight, but Silmar had them set up camp in the woods between the docks and the heart of Valorian. Holm, Iris, and Veldon went into town to buy horses, among other supplies. Iris even promised to find Eliana a skirt, though she swore it wasn't fashionable or practical unless you were nobility. Even though a light rain fell, the group left in high spirits, knowing the days ahead would be easier on horseback. Eliana ached to lie down for the night, but Silmar had other plans. "Flame requires more than heat," he said. They sat beside each other, staring at the sticks Cyrus and Lukai had gathered. "There needs to be a spark, and that spark can come from you." Eliana glanced over at Lukai, who had remained at Kendallen's side almost constantly since Eliana had nearly killed the other woman. Kendallen was finally strong enough to assist in setting up camp, so she and Lukai had laid out all the bedrolls. Now Lukai ran a finger over Kendallen's arm, assessing her recovery. Kendallen had hardly spoken to Eliana since that night, and Eliana couldn't blame her. According to Lukai, Kendallen's burns had run far deeper than those Cyrus had received from the dragon's fire. It was almost like she'd been burned from the inside out. Eliana shuddered, the motion only highlighting the way her body felt feverish and bloated with her blood's energy. "Are you paying attention?" Silmar's sharp tone startled Eliana. "I'm trying," she mumbled. Cyrus gave her a sympathetic look from across the pile of sticks, where he and Jasperus watched. Someone besides Silmar always sat with her during each training session, as if their eagerness might translate into her success. But their presence only made her more nervous that their proximity put them in danger. Silmar sighed. "You're building energy faster than you're releasing it. Your mind is growing numb, like when people eat themselves into a gluttonous stupor. You must release your energy." She nodded, even though that was exactly what she'd been trying to do for the last 2 nights. She had spent both evenings focusing inward, searching for the place where her energy could be channeled, where she could direct it down a path to the rock Silmar wanted her to split, or the tree he wanted her to help grow. Each time she sensed it, her starlock shimmered, sending a flutter of confidence through her. But then she'd remember Kendallen's pained scream, the way her body had flown across the clearing, the horror that had torn through Eliana when she'd thought she'd killed her. "What if I practice archery?" she asked, looking longingly at her white elm bow and its quiver of arrows. She'd carried them plenty, but Cyrus had only taken her out to practice once. It had been relaxing, almost fulfilling. Or even sword fighting. Jasperus shook his head.
You're too full of energy. You're more likely to injure yourself than make headway on those skills.
His words struck true. She was even more likely to hurt someone else. But the same was true of her magic. Splitting a rock could send the pieces flying, and the moment she imagined shards impaling people, her starlock went ice cold. The avenue that had once been cleared for her energy's release, now blocked. Growing a tree could send roots up, wrapping around legs, arms, necks, just like the roots that had bent to Arvid's will when he'd buried the dead girl. Without the ability to control her magic, every action Silmar suggested was dangerous. Even now, when pain left her gasping and she wanted freedom, it was like her subconscious had removed the possibility of accessing her energy. She couldn't sense any way to release it without erupting like the volcano they aimed to reach after Islara.
Reach inside for that spark and send it to the sticks,
Silmar said, drawing her attention back to the place where a fire should be.
Use your energy to provide warmth for the people around you.
It was his newest tactic. He sensed her fear of harming others, so he tried to turn it around into something good she could do. But her blood was so full of energy that she was more likely to start an inferno that rivaled the range of Durakin's breath. She closed her eyes and searched inward anyway. If nothing else, it felt good to take a deep breath and relax. With the loss of vision, her other senses grew stronger. She'd grown used to this, but still found the jungle sounds rewardingly peaceful. Even the distant howls that were too high to be wolves and too long to be foxes or wild dogs. She imagined a wall protecting Cyrus and Jasperus, hoping that if she ever managed to create the spark, she would also create a barrier to keep them safe. Without warning, she was on the ground with Cyrus bent over her, cool hands applying one of Veldon's pastes to her forehead and cheeks. Beyond his red hair, thick clouds rolled and lightning flashed.
You're all right. You just passed out. You'll get it next time.
His tight smile contradicted the encouragement of his words. It took longer than usual for the paste to work, and by the time she sought out Silmar to try again, he waved her away.
I've been told I'm pushing too hard.
It's what I need, isn't it? She asked. I can do it. He studied her, but must have found something wanting.
Not tonight.
She wrapped her arms around her waist and turned away, heading for the small spring they'd used to refill their skins, and traveling downstream until she reached a mossy bank. She removed her shoes, sitting down and slipping her feet into the cool water. Her entire body shivered, even though she felt swollen and heated with the energy beneath her skin. She imagined the cool water slipping through to her veins, replacing the tainted blood, easing her pain and setting her free. Cyrus sat next to her, passing over a helping of cooked fish on a stick. She blinked, noting how much darker it had already gotten. How long had she sat here?
For the record, he said, I agree with the others that you should learn magic. But there's something honorable in your resistance. Like you're subconsciously determined to avoid what's wrong, even if it kills you. I think that tenacity will serve you well in the long run. When you have difficult choices to make, and the wrong thing seems easier than the right. He gave her a sad smile before taking a bite of his own fish, then turned to the waning moon above. She blinked. His words sounded like a compliment, but she didn't feel tenacious or determined at the moment. They sat in silence until he'd picked his first fish clean. Aren't you going to eat? He nudged her arm with his elbow. She should eat, but her stomach churned at the scent of cooked meat. She raised it to her lips and took the smallest of bites to keep him happy. As Eliana chewed, the heat of her energy went cold so suddenly she broke into violent shivers. Cyrus wrapped his cloak around her, setting her stick and fish against a rock. Should I get Silmar or Lukai? He asked. The heat returned in a wave that made her break into a sweat. See if you can find more of Veldon's paste? Cyrus nodded, jumping to his feet. Cold paste slid over her skin, jolting her awake and making her realize she'd passed out once more. Her violent shivers started again as the medicine compensated for the volatile shifts of her body's temperature. This time, it was Jasperus who crouched before her, wiping the paste on her skin.
I'm sorry this has been so difficult for you,
he said. She sighed. Is it possible she already branded me? That she's keeping me from learning? He shook his head.
No. You'll know if you've been branded. A mark will sear your skin, and you'll sense her.
If brands are so terrible, why hasn't anyone else tried stopping her? Why hasn't the royal family labeled her a threat? He frowned and sat back on his heels, setting aside the bowl of paste and wiping his hands on a towel.
Those are good questions. Hopefully, the royal family's silence means they don't know she uses them. If they're aware, it would say a lot about what they truly value. Although brands started out as innocent as bonds, a method to protect children. But removing them was painful, even traumatic, because it severed the connection between parent and child too deeply.
It was cut out? Eliana asked. How does that work?
Just like it sounds, it will leave a permanent mark, even when healed by magic, showing the person was at one time branded. But once removed, there's no more compulsion or attachment.
A spark of hope flared inside her. How hard is it to cut out a brand? Veldon made it sound difficult. Maybe one of you should hang on to my starlock, so there's not risk of me using it against you. Jasperus shook his head.
You could lose moons of training if you avoid your starlock now. Training that could save your life later. Cutting out a brand is difficult, but still possible. The problem is that your desires will match hers, so you'll either hide it from us or leave. I think it's far more likely for us to wake up and find you absent one morning than it is for us to fear you using your magic against us. Mavis will want you by her side.
A shudder ran through Eliana. I suppose the night watch is meant to watch me, as much as it's meant to watch for outsiders. He grimaced, but didn't disagree. The light rainfall that had started with the others' departure grew heavier. Kendallin and Lukai tied a tarp in the trees and pulled the bedrolls closer to the cookware. What about bonds? Can they be cut out the same way? Jasperus's smile was fatherly.
People don't usually want to remove bonds. Give it more time.
That's not. I was just wondering. Her face heated.
making her even more thankful for Veldon's paste.
They can be cut out. It's a painful process. Not as much as a brand, but it still hurts both physically and emotionally.
He glanced at Silmar.
There's only one person I know of who's cut his bond mark out, and he won't ever talk about it. Supposedly, it's like carving out a part of your heart. Even if you fall in love again, you can't quite gain that part back.
Silmar? Eliana had more trouble imagining the old man bonded than she did imagining him cutting out a bond. Jasperus laughed.
If you don't believe me, you can ask him, but I don't recommend it. Most of the time, which is still rare, bonds are broken by infidelity. Bond marks have a way of encouraging faithfulness, because even a kiss can sear the bond mark off.
That seems oddly powerful. Jasperus laughed.
Yes, well, the bonds between couples are oddly powerful. That sort of thing can't be replicated with bonds between children and parents or siblings. I think it's possible.
His words were cut off by shouts from around the main fire, then a high-pitched howl that made Eliana cover her ears. Jasperus stood, drawing his sword out in one fluid motion. His face hardened with determination as he stepped in front of Eliana. What was... Jasperus's hush drowned out her words. She peered over his shoulder, taking in the sight of silvery figures darting between the others at camp. They hunched like wolves, crawling on all fours, but their smooth skin shone like glass and stretched taut over sinewy limbs. They resembled unfinished humans with childlike faces, their large eyes and delicate noses interrupting the smooth silver of hairless heads. When one paused long enough to growl and hiss at Cyrus, its mouth spread wide, revealing hundreds of tiny razor-sharp teeth. Before it could attack, Silmar's sword sliced through its chest, silver blood spilling out around the blade. Another took its place, and Eliana counted at least 8 more swarming Cyrus, Silmar, Lukai, and Kendallin. Instead of joining the fray, Jasperus pulled Eliana toward the edge of the clearing and shoved her down under low-hanging branches, sending rainwater down her back. They crouched down, hiding while he remained guard over her. Gratitude warred with humiliation inside Eliana. If she'd been training like Silmar wanted, would she be able to defend herself? Would she be willing? Or if she'd spent more time learning archery with Cyrus, would she be armed and taking out the creatures along with her friends? The mark on her palm twinged, and her gut flared. Lukai. She peered over Jasperus's shoulder, catching sight of Lukai and Kendallin, back to back as they fought off the animals. Kendallin nearly flew at one of the creatures with her dagger, all signs of weakness absent in the heat of battle. Lukai's sword flashed in the moonlight, spilling silver blood with frightening precision. They were still outnumbered. We have to help them. Eliana tugged at Jasperus's sleeve, but he hushed her. In desperation, she scanned the ground, digging through wet leaves and ferns until her hand found a large rock in the mud. She scooted back away from Jasperus, then came around the other side of the tree until she could stand and aim at the nearest one's head. She held her breath, recalling the way she'd aimed the arrow at the tree, the way everything else could disappear as her vision narrowed. Only this time her target was moving, and maintaining that strength of focus made her dizzy. She let the rock fly, and it miraculously struck the center of the silver head. Instead of doing any harm, the creature turned around, hissing. Its gaze darted around the clearing until it found Eliana and locked eyes with her. Jasperus swore under his breath, then bolted in front of Eliana as the creature bounded toward them. Instead of swinging his sword, Jasperus tightened his grip on Eliana's wrist. Just before the creature lunged, it skidded to a stop, a wrinkle forming above its eyes. After a long moment, it snarled.
Magic,
The creature hissed. Eliana sucked in a breath. It can talk?
of course. It's a Winix.
Jasperus's voice came out strained. Eliana had heard of the creatures that waxed and waned with the moon, but she'd thought they were fables. It sat back on its haunches and howled, making the others pause in indecision. Half of them raced off into the night, but those who still fought were left at a distinct disadvantage. In unison, they all threw their heads back, letting a strange tinkling sound escape their lips. It almost looked like they were laughing. It left Eliana and the others stunned, and through a sluggish haze, Eliana watched her comrades all hesitate. The Winix each got in a swipe. One even snatched a dagger from Lukai's hand. Her friends recovered and resumed their attack with renewed purpose. Silmar's staff was once again molten, cutting through two of the Winix like they were wax being melted. For being a healer, Lukai had no qualms about using his magic to drain the Winix of health. Eliana stepped back, shocked at the sudden turn. It was as if they'd been holding back their magic, hiding it, and the moment they were found out, they let it loose. Kendalyn's eyes grew haunted as she flung her dagger, like she was seeing a different dimension. Was that how Eliana looked when she used her magic to aim? Even Cyrus managed to draw blood, holding his own against the Winix attacking him. Despite its apparent howl for retreat, the Winix before them leaned in, sniffing at Jasperus.
You smell wrong.
It sat back again, wiping rainwater from its eyes and bouncing on its hind legs like it itched to launch at them. Within moments, it was the last creature left alive in the clearing, as it debated whether or not to attack. Soon, it was whining, like its indecision was physically painful. Silmar approached from behind, then held his staff near the Winix's head, the heat making the creature cry out in fear. Lukai took a rope, wrapping it around the Winix's wrists. Finally, Jasperus dropped his grip on Eliana, bending at the waist with a gasp. The Winix went wild, snarling and snapping in Jasperus's direction, but the rope held firm, and the proximity of Silmar's staff eventually left the Winix still, heaving and glaring in Eliana and Jasperus's direction. Even Cyrus gawked at the two of them. "What just happened?" Eliana asked.
You were Winix,
Cyrus said.
Jasperus adjusted your appearance,
Silmar corrected.
He created the illusion that you were both Winix, which made this one hesitate. Female,
The Winix added. Then it clamped its mouth shut in regret. Silmar nodded.
Yes, he made you appear like female Winix, which a male Winix would never attack.
Only we didn't smell right, Eliana muttered, the creature's accusation coming back to her. She glanced at Jasperus. "Thank you." He nodded, still breathing too hard to speak. The creature's head fell back, his eyes squinting as his jaw widened. But before he could let loose that strange, paralyzing laugh, Silmar let his staff fall against the creature's skin. The Winix howled.
"Who sent you?"
Silmar asked. The Winix frowned.
"We don't work for people."
He spat at Silmar's feet, but Aeliana detected fear. They'd never get answers by intimidating him. She eased closer. "What's your name?" Silmar shot her a scathing look. The creature bared his teeth in her direction.
"Felk."
Silmar stepped between them.
"If you weren't sent, why did you attack?"
Felk shook his head, then thought better of it as Silmar drew the staff closer.
"We scavenge. 2 nights we took food. Tonight you were left. 10 of us. 6 of you.
He glared at Silmar.
But you have magic."
Kendallin stepped forward, grimacing as she placed a palm on the creature's wet silver skin. He howled his frustration, but Silmar's staff and Lukai's rope kept him still. "He's lying about the food. They've taken some the past 5 nights, but the rest of what he said is true." Kendallin removed her hand, then rubbed her palm against her thigh with a shudder.
"Yes, we have magic."
Silmar leaned in, bringing his staff to touch Felk's cheek. The Winix screamed in agony, but didn't move. When Silmar pulled his staff back, a small black mark marred the silver skin of the Winix's cheek, like a black tear permanently bleeding from his eye.
"Make sure your friends know we have magic. Do not follow us again."
The Winix blinked mournfully. When Lukai removed the rope holding him, Felk tore out of the clearing in a blur of silver flesh. Chapter 30. Aura stood on the prow of Starspeed, closing her eyes and letting the wind rifle through her hair, praying for the sun's light to fill her to the brim. The storm had come and gone, taking portions of their foremast and mizzenmast with it. She'd known it would be the case when Karyne chose that path, but there was little she could do about it. They'd been delayed 4 days already, and would likely be stuck on the coast of the Sound for another 2 or 3 for repairs. Even now the sound of hammers on wood clashed with the peaceful warmth she absorbed. Karyne worked as hard as the others, gaining their respect in ways he couldn't have earned otherwise. The delay had purpose, even if she'd rather be on the move. Her frustration was nothing compared to Karyne's palpable agitation, which made Lenda and the younger crew avoid him. To pass the time, she'd told the men more stories of her time at sea, making up ancestors instead of revealing her role in history. People had trouble understanding the weight of immortality. They had trouble accepting it. Even Aura hadn't understood its full impact until the last 1,000 years. Chasing what the people called star bridges, while knowing the stars watched, likely judged, gave her fresh perspective. She toyed with the braid on her wrist. "Is there significance to your bracelet?" Karyne's voice didn't startle her. She'd sensed him standing there for the last several moments, debating if and when he should interrupt her thoughts. likely deciding if it was worth breaking his silence to get more answers. Without opening her eyes, she nodded. It was a gift. A gift. A farewell. A painful reminder. Nothing was ever just one thing. From a bondmate? In another time, she might have laughed. Bonds are a trivial attempt to mirror an intimacy that goes beyond what the world offers. She opened her eyes, flicking a meaningful glance in Lenda's direction. Their bond wasn't taking. Aura had tested it because she suspected as much. Garen fought it. And for that reason, Aura respected him more than most men. Garen's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. It was probably the first time they'd agreed on something. She supposed she'd been hard on him, asking things she couldn't answer herself, questioning his motives when he could just as easily question hers. She wanted the arrow, but she had no intention of making the world bigger or smaller. Was it wrong to want it for her own gain after all these years? Did it make it any more right if obtaining it also benefited Garen or Aeliana? She glanced back at her wrist, where the soft blonde strands shone in the sun's light, wishing she could ask its owner for advice one last time. And yet, she didn't need to ask him. She already knew he would tell her to seek out the sun. He was more than a bondmate, she said softly. He was my other half. She wasn't sure why she revealed this detail. Few people knew the braid's significance. They were all long gone now, anyway. Men she'd bonded with, women she'd confided in, children who became adults, then faded to dust, like Winnicks aging as fast as the moon. Only they didn't return like the Winnicks, and Aura no longer wished to distract herself from her true purpose. I'm sorry for your loss. Garen wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing back at the men still working. He showed promise. The light shining from him was the same as it had been for others in generations past. A hope that gave her love for people, even the misguided ones. Thank you, she murmured, pressing the braid to her lips, longing to feel its hum, to sense the star bridges once more. Garen returned to his work, rebuilding threads that joined him to his crew, along with the masts that had kept them from sailing. Was it too late to rebuild her threads with the sun after all these years? She used to want to fix things to regain the sun's favor. But the sun wasn't the oppressive judge the Vendarans believed it to be. Her own shame and guilt kept her from claiming the sun's full favor. She could sing a dying human to the sun's light, but she'd lost her own right to that gift long ago. Hadn't she? She was grounded to the earth, tethered in ways she didn't want by all the actions she regretted. But the sun had left her here for a purpose. She might never be free again, but there were wounds she could heal, wrongs she could right. She would put things back together, even if it took her another 1,000 years. Chapter 31. Aeliana found herself watching for Felk's return, even though Silmar insisted the Winnocks were long gone. Now that they traveled on horseback, they had covered more ground, but it wouldn't be impossible for the Winnocks to keep up.
They fear magic. They won't be back,
Silmar said when he caught Eliana squinting at the darkness beyond their campfire.
There's no need to be concerned.
I'm not afraid, Eliana said, and it was true. What she felt was more like curiosity, but even that was numbed by the energy filling her.
They could come back with the new moon,
Veldon said.
They won't remember Silmar's warning then.
He offered Eliana a biscuit, but she shook her head. Her belly felt too full to ingest anything. It had felt that way for the last day, and despite the energy growing inside her, she sensed her body getting weaker without nourishment. I'm more concerned about the sprites, Kendallin muttered, glaring at the creek, which had widened significantly as the day wore on. Silmar had wanted to travel farther, but the others refused to camp any closer to Lover's Falls. Supposedly, it was the home of the sprites, who were just as likely to curse someone seeking their aid as they were to grant a wish. Instead of stopping, their party would skirt the sprites during the sun's reign. After dinner, Silmar pulled Eliana aside. She assumed it was for another lesson, even though the previous night had ended with her falling asleep while trying to adjust the energy within her. They sat across from each other on two large rocks, the sounds of smothered laughter and chatter drifting from where the others remained by the fire.
Your lessons aren't going well.
Silmar's blunt words were like icy wind on Eliana's face. They stung, but they also brought her awake. I grew up believing magic was a tool for stealing, hurting, and killing. She pressed her lips together, knowing it still was for people like Arvid. It's hard to instantly reverse my thinking. She wrapped her cloak tighter around herself, even though it made her skin feel taut and raw. He grunted, but it didn't necessarily sound like he disagreed.
I fear you're beyond lessons at this point. We may need to bleed you.
The heat enveloping Eliana was near bursting, but something cold still slithered through her. You said we wouldn't use blood magic. He held up a hand.
You're right. We won't use it. But you need a release of the energy inside you. I'd prefer to wean you by having you expend small bits of energy. But if that's not possible, bleeding small bits is the only other way.
What about the dark spirits? She whispered.
They won't come unless you use the blood for magic.
They came the last time I bled myself, when I killed that family. Her words came out sharper than she intended, her fear tainting her tone. He hesitated, making his previous confidence less reassuring.
It's a choice to invite them in. You didn't understand that, and you lost control. This time, Veldon and I will be here to watch you and protect you.
She bit her lip, her gaze on the others in the group. Who would protect them? Holm and Iris leaned into each other, the subtle, constant love between them, proof of what a bond could be, what it should be. Holm didn't even need magic for his quiet, gentle presence to soothe Eliana, which was why she preferred sharing chores with him each night. Would Iris still dote on Eliana if dark spirits tore through home? How many people would be harmed if the spirits fused with Eliana and drained the energy still growing within her? She closed her eyes, attempting to block out the terrifying images of Cyrus's and Jasperus's bodies, pale and still, like the family she'd killed at the farm. She couldn't imagine letting a single person in this camp suffer, just so she could be free of the pain building up within her veins. "It's killing you, Eliana." Silmar's words softened, and the shift nearly broke her. "I think anyone else would have succumbed to it by now." His words rang with a truth she didn't want to acknowledge. She felt like her insides were near bursting. Is that how it would happen? Would she fill up with so much energy that her body would be unable to contain it? She opened her eyes, holding his gaze. "Maybe it will kill me. Maybe that's the best way for me to protect everyone from Mavis. When she brands me, she'll be able to override what's holding me back, and then I'll be a limitless resource to her." "You think we'd bring you all this way just to let you die?" Silmar's gravelly voice grew desperate, deepening to a hoarseness that made Eliana want him to cough and clear his throat. "No. If we don't see any improvement by tomorrow, we should consider bleeding you. We have to at least try." She nodded slightly, and he relaxed. But she wasn't agreeing with his plan. She was agreeing that she had to try something. He headed for the campfire, but instead of following him, Eliana let her eyes drift shut while tugging at her blouse and the new split skirt Iris had bought for her in Valorian. She'd been grateful for the swap, since the trousers had felt even more constricting with the buildup of energy inside her. Sweat dripped down her temples, its constant layer something she was quickly becoming used to. But the sounds of the jungle filled Eliana's ears, like a symphony of foreign instruments. What had initially been soothing became more grating, as everything in Eliana ached, even her hypersensitive skin. When Jasperus barked out a laugh, the others hushed him. Eliana opened her eyes a crack, following the fearful gazes aimed toward where the waterfall must be. The sprites, who someone would have to be desperate to seek out for a wish. This time, Eliana's eyes came fully open, her senses on high alert. How desperate was she? Which was more desperate, blood magic or sprites? Silmar's insistence that she bleed herself was already an act of desperation. The dark spirits would come. They would have her do blood magic, whether she wanted to or not. But seeking out the sprites for a wish, even a wish to be rid of her magic, could have equally disastrous consequences. No, she couldn't go to the sprites, but she also couldn't stay here. She let her gaze roam over these people she'd grown to care for, friends she hadn't anticipated making. She wasn't willing to put them at risk. Tonight's desperation had to be dealt with alone. Eliana rose, determined, and assured the others she just needed to relieve herself. While passing their stores, She snuck a knife and bandages from one of the supply bags, her heart pounding, expecting someone to shout and ask what she was doing. She strained to hold her head high and back straight as she walked upstream until she rounded a bend and stepped out of sight. Then she let her shoulders slump and her back hunch, as if her torso nursed a wound. She wrapped her arms around her waist, stumbling through the water as she picked up her pace. Eventually, they would follow, so she needed to move fast. As the voices faded behind her, blending into the burble of the water, she breathed in as deep as her tight chest allowed, relishing the small taste of freedom. The dark shadows and lush leaves around her were more comforting than smothering, but she was grateful for the water. She'd never find her way back without it, if she was able to come back. Eventually, the stream met up with a larger river, and the sound of rushing water beckoned her. This time she stayed on the mossy bank, wary of what creatures might rest in the deeper waters. A soft chirp broke through the constant splashing. She strained her ears for a few moments before the noise came again. It trilled like a bird, but the notes were too perfect and the sound too human. The third call gained a response, deeper, fuller, like a delayed harmony. Were those the sounds of the sprites? The calls came closer, one on top of the other, forming a song with the percussive rush of water as its rhythmic chorale. Despite her exhaustion, the music drew her in until the water crescendoed to a thunderous roar, and the river made one last bend to reveal a massive lake and waterfall feeding into it. The pool at the base of the waterfall churned hard and fast, its power frighteningly mesmerizing, while the water lapping at her feet seemed remarkably still in comparison. She scanned the water and its edge, noting a small, winding trail leading straight up the side of a cliff that had to be nearly 200 feet high. Her heart sank at its steep and treacherous angle. This was where the sprites had to be. The melodious calls increased in volume, as if confirming her suspicion. She'd come far enough. She pulled out the knife, testing its weight, as if it could tell her how to proceed. If she cut her palm, she could try to resist the blood magic. She could bleed out just enough before wrapping the wound. If that didn't work, at least she wouldn't be around to hurt the others. Before she could talk herself out of it, she used the knife to slice her skin along one of the many scars left by Arvid and Vera. The knife fell from her grasp, blood dripping down after it. A sense of relief spread from her arm through her torso, then out to her other appendages. The heady sensation left her light and airy, until the feeling grew even stronger. Why had she waited so long to do this? She placed her right hand over the wound, ignoring the twinge of discomfort as the euphoria grew. She should bind the wound now, before too much blood was spilled. Or maybe she could heal herself. She'd never done that kind of magic before, but now she had a starlock. Maybe it would be instinctual, like shooting arrows. Maybe this time she could stop things before they got out of control. But her body refused. Her starlock burned hot, almost as if calling the blood to a higher purpose, encouraging it to be used. The starlocks were gifts from the stars. If the Starlock burned for the magic in her blood, how could blood magic be so bad? She sensed her mind being pulled along with her body, finding ways to explain away the wrongness, but she couldn't stop it. She fell to her knees, her hands burying in the dirt. As the blood hit the earth, she knew she could send out its power, so she did. The ground cracked beneath her. Daisies sprouted in a wave from the soil at her fingertips out to the edge of the water. But there was a sinister air to the speed, like time passing by and aging her, taking life she could never get back. She tried to rein it in, tried to remember how Lukai had described the process of healing. The small stitches of the skin, she could seal it off and stop it all. It wasn't too late. A moan met her ears, which turned to a scream. It erupted from her own mouth as she fought the blood magic's darker pull. But her body remembered too well that relief could come if the blood kept flowing. Her mind tricked her, telling her she could use this magic to get vengeance, to right all the ways she'd been wronged. Over the rush of the waterfall and her own muffled whimpers, the shouts of her companions drew nearer. Far worse and more subtle were the flickers in the sky. Flashes of shadows blocked the quarter moon, hiding both the static stars and the dancing holy stars. Her friends were coming, and so were the dark spirits. She couldn't control what her body did with this amount of magic. She'd already called the dark spirits without meaning to, and now her friends were coming. She squinted up at the sprite's trail, then back at the way she'd come, where her friends were surely looking for her. She couldn't let them find her. She couldn't let her magic hurt them. The melodious notes rang out once more, beckoning her to climb the trail, to seek safety for her companions. That was when she finally knew how desperate someone had to be to seek out the sprites. I hope you enjoyed listening to this first installment of Blood of the Stars by Karyne Norton. To get reminders for new episodes and to stay up to date with my books, be sure to sign up for my newsletter at KarynNorton.com. You'll also get the prequel short story to Blood of the Stars in ebook and audio for free. Thanks so much for listening.